Hey, all you beautiful Ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be. Every Thursday at noon Eastern. We had a phenomenal week last week on Ethicsverse Day 2.0. We broke all kinds of records, over 4,500 signups, over 57,000 emojis, if you can believe it. We had a phenomenal day, and today we're going to be talking about everything you may have missed. So we're going to do a recap of the full day, all 4 of those sessions with the one and only voice of compliance, the one and only Tom Fox. So let's get a massive emoji explosion to get this kicked off. Like I say every week, drop that LinkedIn URL in the chat, connect with someone today, and take advantage of this community that we're all a part of. You get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. And if you don't want to put your LinkedIn URL, we can find you anyways. Just kidding. At least put in where you're coming from and, connect with someone today. If you're here for credits, this is the place to be. So we gave out, I don't know, thousands and thousands of credits last week. So if you're from HRCI, you have a designation from SHRM or the CCB, this is the place to be every single week to get free credits and to feed your brain. And speaking of feeding your brain, there's so much thought leadership coming out. You got to be tuned into this stuff. The one and only voice of compliance here, you can see on Tom's background. Those are all awards that this guy has won from podcasting. And so if you don't follow the Compliance Podcast Network, if you have not checked out the Two Gurus podcast, one of my all-time faves with Tom Fox and the one and only Christy Grant Hart, you definitely should do that. So click this URL or click this QR code. And if you don't know how a QR code works, welcome to 2025. Google that. But definitely follow Tom. I mean, so much of what I learned comes from Tom and the guests that he has on his myriad podcasts. So definitely check that out. And here's a little taste for you of a current series me and Tom are doing where we're really bringing AI down onto the front lines. And we're talking about how you can embed that deeper into your program. That's really what it all boils down to. So when we're not making good bets with our time, or we're spending time on things that are not moving the needle, or we're just picking one piece of straw, hoping, fingers crossed, that we find that needle in the haystack, it kind of presents a vulnerability to our programs and to our careers at the end of the day.
Nick, I'm beginning to think I should quit sending you outlines because you say things that I want to take this whole podcast in a completely different way. And I've heard you use this phrase before, but it just struck me when you said it again. And that phrase is crowdsourcing risk intelligence at scale.
That's the name of the game. We got to get more risk intelligence. We have to get more input from the stakeholders in our organization. And tune into that podcast, Upping Your Game, which you can find on YouTube. And also today, of course, the world famous book giveaway is in full effect. We're giving out, last week we gave out 50-some plus books. And today we are featuring, Tom's written a ton of books, but I really love this children's book series. There was somebody that I met at a conference who bought 30 copies of this and sent it around to all the stakeholders, all the managers at their level within the organization, and even to the board. And it was a massive light bulb moment across the organization. So many times people have such a misconception about what ethics and compliance does. And these books are really cool. You can read them to your kids or your grandkids, or send them up to the board. So we're going to be giving away 5 of those today to people that are most active in the chat. Couple of quick announcements. Ethico is constantly, we generate way better business results. You can check out our G2 for proof of actual verified users. And you can check out our benchmark report to see how much faster we're able to close cases and how much better of a extension of your program we can be. We're not right for everyone, but if we are, now's the time to check us out. We just did a massive update on our UX. So I want to share this with you right now. A little quick video on this, a quick less than a minute here, just to kind of talk through our new UX. So this is what our thing used to look like, and now we just did a massive upgrade. So we have a better dashboards in place, all your information in one spot. And so when you have that information at your fingertips, like I was saying on that video from Upping Your Game, you can really make better bets with your time. That's what our job comes down to. If you're trying to drive impact, we're trying to de-risk our organization and build an authentic culture of integrity, it means that we are having the most impact possible. And so we are constantly striving to improve our tool, and we got some great results from that. G2 rated us as the best ethics and compliance software in the world. So round of applause to the Ethico team and to the dev team and all the people that work to kind of try to bring that value forward. We recently released our new risk assessment tool. This is a flexible tool influenced by people on the front lines, people like you, to get better risk intelligence on a more frequent basis. So again, we can make those better bets with our time. So this quarter, we have a 50% off as we launch this tool. It's gotten a lot of great feedback so far. And we are extending our offer from Ethicsverse Day. So Ethicsverse Day, we put together a number of different packages, and we are bringing forward our DOJ defense package. So you can see a bunch of things that are included here. I'll be putting these slides up throughout the presentation. But 25% off if you mention that when you speak to somebody from our team. So it doesn't matter if you're ready to make a move right now. Now's the time. And it's frankly incumbent on you to make sure that your team has the right tools so that your department can have the biggest impact possible. You were hired for a reason. It's your job to help de-risk that organization and create those circumstances for compliant behavior and bring more people into this risk management apparatus that helps to drive more enterprise value and more excellence in your organization. Also, if you missed anything from last week or you just like a good takeaway, check the console and also check the chat. Joe is going to be dropping in a link right now to it's kind of an ebook that covers all the sections, all the biggest takeaways from Ethicsverse Day 2.0, which was, not my words, the coolest event of the summer. All right, let's jump right in here. We have the one and only voice of compliance, the one and only Tom Fox here. We're kind of inspecting a little bit of a black hole situation here. How's it going, Tom?
Going great, Nick. Happy to be here with you today.
All right, so Tom, you've been observing compliance space for decades, with your podcast and all the work that you've done in our space and with your practice. What are some of the standout themes that you have from Ethicsverse Day last week? And what do you think practitioners are really wrestling with right now?
So, Nick, I think it follows really the pattern of both politics and business and the economy for the first half of the year, and that now we, I think, are getting the parameters of the refocus of the Trump administration on what their priorities for prosecution are. These were not unknown things. Obviously, tariffs and a variety of other areas that this administration deems important, competition, national competition, U.S. companies getting business, but all of this is in a way that it is a refocus. And I'm almost now of the opinion, Nick, that compliance is even more important than it was in December of 2024 because of these changes and because companies are having to pivot down to what some different areas that are going to be looked at, whether it's antitrust. There have been several articles about I-9 inspections, which have been around for 30 years, but now the government's getting serious about it. What's I-9 compliance? It means having your forms filled out correctly. That's called compliance. And if you're going to talk to me about document, I'm going to say document. Yes, all of your documentation should be in order and it should be correct. So are you looking at things internally that the government is concerned about? Who are you doing business? Where are you doing business? Where are they doing business? All of these questions have become much more important. And with the government-focused panel, although I recognize government practitioners were not on that panel, I think they talked about this refocus and the initiatives that the federal government's going to take. The AI panel was equally interesting for me, certainly based upon my most recent book that we're doing the podcast series on. What's the role of AI in compliance, and how can we use AI to help compliance move literally at the speed of business, or to quote your phrase, build crowd intelligence for risk at scale within your corporation? So those are some of the key themes for me.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to kind of this overarching central theme that seemed to come up throughout all four of the sessions that we covered, this sort of evolving role of ethics and compliance. How would you kind of describe this transformation, and why is it so critical that we embrace this right now? I think, I kind of talked a little bit about it, and I continue to talk about, it feels like we're kind of at this inflection point where the evolution of the ethics and compliance role within the organization can kind of go right or left. So how does a modern organization embrace that better, and why do you think it's so critical right now?
Well, when the president made his announcement in February of 2025 of the suspension of FCPA investigation and enforcement, I think many in the compliance community were concerned about what's our role going forward. And as I've tried to make clear, Wei Chen sort of led the charge by saying just what you said, Nick. We're at an inflection point, and we have to show business value, the business value for compliance, to continue to grow and move forward as a corporate discipline and as a corporate profession. I took that challenge, and that's why I wrote the book about AI. So part of it is what's the business value? Well, what's the business value of compliance right now? And how do we make the change to pivot over to what the regulators want to focus on? How can we do it at the speed of business? And finally, how do we crowdsource that intelligence that you have talked about into actionable information? And by crowdsource, I mean, how do we get the information that's in our employees' heads, hearts, and hard drives to the business folks who can then either make decisions based upon the information they're getting or plan ahead for the next change, whatever that might be?
Yeah, I mean, we can really help make our businesses more resilient. It's not just about kind of putting a policy together, as we've talked about at length. It's about creating those circumstances for a higher degree of excellence or a higher degree of like business quality. I think that's what leads to kind of the outperformance, and that's why you constantly see across up and down markets, different sort of macro environment, different sort of market sort of seasons, whether it's expansionary or retractionary, you see those most ethical organizations outperforming their counterparts. So we talked about the kind of interconnectedness of these various aspects of ethics and compliance across the 4 sessions, right? Yes. So how do you think how does a strong speak up culture, effective AI governance, strategic engagement, or strategic preparation for DOJ engagement, you know what I mean? How does that build a resilient and ethical organization?
Or I could even, if I could also suggest, drive business value. So let's take the current Trump focus on something he has not implemented yet, but he says he's going to: secondary tariffs. What's a secondary tariff? It's not a tariff on Russia. It's a tariff on people who do business with Russia. Well, that means everyone in our supply chain and every customer, we now have to assess, are they doing business with Russia? Or are they doing business with China? Who's doing business with Russia? Is that going to exponentially increase our tariffs? But to tie it back to the business value in all this, Nick, and it started during the pandemic and it's accelerated in 2025. During the pandemic, we had to look at our supply chains because we had to see, are we going to lose a geographic area due to a geopolitical event, or back then the pandemic? Are we going to lose certain key suppliers in certain countries? And if so, how do we re-engineer our supply chain literally on the fly? The brilliance of that from the business perspective is many companies had not looked beyond their first tier suppliers.
Exactly.
Well, now they were looking down 2, 3, 4, and 5. And of course, you began to discover inefficiencies. You began to discover duplications. And you began to see, maybe I do need some inefficiencies in case something goes wrong. On the other hand, if I have 5 sub-tier 5 suppliers all supplying the same thing, maybe I don't need that many. And maybe I can create greater efficiency for my organization within that supply chain. Well, that exercise is now on steroids because the government is saying we are going to, if we put secondary tariffs in place, then it's up to you, Mr. or Ms. Company, to comply with that. But the business value of that is it's made your supply chain much more resilient and your customer base the same.
Well, and I think to that point, that kind of speaks to the opportunity that we all have right now. And on the one hand, it's easy to look at all of this change as like chaos and are we going to exist? We can look at that through a really negative lens, or we can also look at the other side of the coin, which is really this creates a lot of opportunity for us. So if we don't have enough power in the organization, or we don't have enough influence, or we don't have the resources we need, now there are some of these sort of exogenous sort of, not to get dramatic, but existential threats perhaps to our business because we don't have that second layer of visibility, to use your example, that we can now step forward and we can kind of take advantage of that. We have to help the organization see around the curve. These risks are changing all the time. This isn't like a flat land. It's like an undulating floor that we're sort of walking across. All of our businesses are walking across, and it's on us to have our finger on the pulse of these changes that are coming. And it's on us to speak up within our organization to get the resources we need to make the impact that is going to, matter most for our business.
I don't want to scare you too much yet, but just think quantum mechanics for business.
Ooh, I think I got another, it sounds like another podcast series there, Tom. So, there was, I really, I was really excited for Ethicsverse Day 2.0. I had high hopes for it, and it really kind of blew past it. The feedback we've gotten was phenomenal, and I personally learned so much in each one of the sessions. So I really want to, we've just been sort of talking macro level about like the big takeaways and so forth. Now I want to kind of dive deep into each one of these sessions and really kind of talk through our biggest takeaways from the session. So our first session was high stakes speak up, ethics, and whistleblowing. And we had on Ellen Coons, we had Tom Harden, we had Mary Inman, and we had the one and only Sharon Watkins, who took down Enron. In that session, there were so many great takeaways. But during the session, we heard from Ellen, Sharon, and Tom about this sort of gap between sort of a compliance program on paper and what actually works or what actually happens in the organization. How do you think we can move beyond just having a hotline and creating what Mary deemed or kind of termed as a human intelligence source? How do we sort of move beyond the sort of, paper program to one that is actually activating these human sensors in the organization, as you were just saying?
This has been a part of the discussion since 2018 when Kyle Welch published his paper on the both cost savings and greater ROI of companies that had a true culture of speak up. It starts with a reporting system. It starts with a anonymous whistleblower line. It starts with a way for someone to raise their hand and speak up, but it's much more than that. It's speak up. It's psychological safety that allows employees to speak up, and equally importantly is the listen up. So you have to have leaders who are committed to listening, and I don't mean the CEO, I mean all the way down to middle managers. But if you have that culture within a company, you begin to untie and open that crowd-sourced intelligence that is within your own employees. I used to say, it's your own data. Why don't you look at it? Well, why don't we throw the data out and say, it's your own employees who know the data much better than you and I do sitting in the compliance function. Why don't we tap into that source of intelligence? And why don't we use that to develop not only our compliance program, but also our business operations resiliency going forward? And if we can bring an AI tool or tools into that, then we can operate literally at the speed of AI. And if you can do that in today's business world, where either if a new opportunity arises, you can move towards it quickly, or if there's a change in government enforcement priorities, you can pivot that way. You'll be ahead of the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on this Parkinson's law thing so much lately, where this thing says work fills the available time. So this dynamic that we have, where we all have so much to do, that's not like unique to us in compliance. That's just unique to sort of the human experience. And so thus, the game then becomes, how can we make better bets with our time? How can we spend this limited time on the things that are going to move the needle the most? And if we're only looking at reactionary data, well, then we're going to be kind of looking backwards, and we're going to be kind of walking backwards through life. When we can get sort of better real-time intelligence, as you're talking about, we can react a lot more quickly. And I think you're right. I think it does start with that sort of leadership behavior and that listening up thing. And I think it also kind of, hinges on the extent to which we're able to like move from like a myopic view on like what the scope of our roles are within the organization, something that's a lot more expansive. When we can think about our job is not just to like keep the company out of trouble, but rather to like build a more resilient organization or drive more business excellence throughout the company, vis-a-vis a culture of intelligence or a culture of integrity, vis-a-vis an organization where you have all these human sensors walking around who feel enabled and empowered to share their input or share the risk intelligence that they're seeing. This circulatory system that the compliance department can really start bringing the right nutrients to the various parts of the body. And this old way of us being viewed as sort of the office of no, or us being viewed as the office of slow, or any of these other kind of derogatory, caricatures that a lot of us are sort of fighting through, they start to sort of naturally melt away. I think when we can remember that everybody is self-serving and they all have this sort of self-preservation thing, and they're all looking for ways to do more with less and, kick more ass, whatever you want to say, when we can show that value, it's crazy. We just like magically start to get sort of drawn into conversations that, before we felt like we were on the other side outside of. So, I think that this retaliation thing came up a bunch because pretty much everybody on the panel who had done some whistleblowing, or, Tom as an FBI informant, they experience varying levels of retaliation. And, when we're talking about unlocking all these human sensors in the organization and unlocking all these potential sources for like risk intelligence, that number one stopper is usually either, fear of retaliation, of course, or like no one thinks that they're going to do, anything is going to be done about it. What do you think some of the like pervasive ways that retaliation manifests, and how do you think that ends up really undermining the integrity and trust? Because I feel like sometimes this like chilling effect that, a retaliation can be in the organization, it ends up kind of being a rock in the boot, and we just think that it's status quo and, there's nothing we can do about it.
So my favorite phrase around all of that, I heard 20 plus years ago, which was, he's really not a team player. Mm-hmm. And it always starts with that, not a team player. And I don't want to limit it to males because women cannot be team players too, but it starts with that. They're identified as not a team player, and it goes downhill from there. And so you have got to get your middle managers who are generally on the front line of receiving this information to understand this is intelligence that is needed within the organization, whether it's needed because it's a potential legal or ethical violation, or it's needed to make your company more profitable. It's information. And I think Mary has consistently told us over the years that 90% of all whistleblowers report internally first. Right. And they are disregarded. They're marginalized. They're actively discriminated against. They're actively harassed. And that's when people have, gotten fed up enough to go to the regulators. They don't pick up the phone and call Mary Inman to start with, although I'd recommend they do that. But they do it after they have tried to do the right thing. They've tried to report internally, and they're deemed not a team player or too aggressive, or that's not the way we do things here. And it just goes downhill from there.
Yeah, we had a panel a couple of weeks ago, and we had somebody who worked as a defense attorney and one of Mary's colleagues, this guy Ari, and they both consistently said exactly what you said, that anytime somebody goes outside the organization, it's really because they felt like their concern was not addressed. And I think there's this gap that a lot of organizations have, maybe because they're, too legal minded or something, where they don't feel like they can communicate in a transparent enough way to that whistleblower, that ends up kind of causing them to feel in many ways that their concern was not addressed. What do you think about that sort of gap, or maybe the oversampling, or the let's call it oversampling on like opacity from like a legal defense perspective, and how there might be a different way to be a little bit more transparent, to really kind of multiply out, or really kind of demonstrate to the rest of the stakeholders that the commitment that the company has to see something, say something, speaking up, listening up, whatever, is real and not just a poster on the wall?
So I think it is speak up, listen up, and you have to train middle managers on the listen up, because they are the point people for your communication and for leadership within your organization. If the CEO stands up and says, my door is always open, come see me and we'll have a conversation, no one's going to do that, period. Right. Even if you can get on his calendar or her calendar. But you can't go walk in a CEO's office of a Fortune 100 company. But middle managers are people who were generally very good at their jobs and got promoted because they were very good, whether it was a technical expertise, whether it was a sales expertise or something else. Those skills don't translate into leadership skills, and they don't translate into people management skills. And so the thing that compliance professionals tell me they hear the most from middle managers is, please train me. Please tell me how to be a conduit of speak up, and teach me how to listen up so I can pass that information along. So I think it really starts with a commitment to train middle managers in how to listen up and then how to pass that information along. But it doesn't mean middle manager puts note on door, open door policy. It means in meetings, it means in one-on-ones. It means when you get your team together, you create a place of psychological safety where people can do that. And so it's an all-encompassing 360-degree effort. But I think it's got to start with that. It was great when the CEO says it, but the reality is nobody's going to go to the CEO's office. Maybe like Sharon Watkins, they'd send an email, but look where that got. So I think if companies are serious, they would commit and then recommit to giving middle managers the training they need to be that conduit. But it's not a one and done. It's continual training. It's continual conversations about these are our values at our company, that we are going to honor people who say something because I'm going to listen to you if you say it.
You know, I think we have this kind of misconception between like children and adults. And we think like, oh, if somebody's an adult, I just have to sort of say something twice. But children and adults are both humans. And I got to tell you, I am constantly telling my kids to like say please and thank you to servers, to their mother. Like I have to say it all the time. And to your point, if we're not constantly reminding the human beings that are in our organization, particularly at that middle manager level, of how to listen up better and the importance of it, not just from like a corporate de-risking perspective, but from a selfish, from their own perspective, that, if you're listening up, your team is going to be more engaged. You're going to have a bunch of extra eyes out there to help improve the business that you're responsible for, the department that you're responsible for. If we're not singing that song over and over again, people are going to forget that tune. You can't just hear a song once and like very few of us can just like play that song by ear. But if you've heard it 1,000 times, it becomes so much more easy to kind of exhibit that behavior. So we had put out a free middle manager toolkit a couple of months ago, and we updated that recently. Joe, if you can find it, maybe you can drop that in the chat. Many times, there's a lot of people on here who are like, oh yeah, there is a great opportunity in these middle managers, right? Like they're 6 to 8 times more likely to hear a complaint or hear a piece of risk intelligence as opposed to like the anonymous intake channel that exists in the organization. But so few of those 6 to 8 times more, quote unquote reports make their way into the central risk brain. We as compliance have this opportunity, right, as the circulatory system of the organization that touch so many different departments, and with the tools we have in place to really get a much broader view of risk intelligence, not just in terms of like code of conduct violations, but in terms of like ways to improve the business, ways to de-risk the business, ways to eliminate waste. And like in every P&L, which leads down to a bottom line, which leads down to some EBITDA or some cash flow on the bottom of that, or some net income on the bottom of that P&L, it's replete with waste across every single category. And all humans are natural optimizers. So when we can open up the eyes of middle managers that they have a massive opportunity to improve processes or to, stamp out risks in their department, that can have a direct impact on the impact that they're having on the organization vis-a-vis their department. There's just so much opportunity right now that 20 years ago, that was not at our fingertips,
Nick, I think you just described the crowdsourcing of risk intelligence.
I think you're right. You see, I'm trying to sing this song over and over again as well here. Okay, so we could keep talking about the whistleblower session. And if any of you guys missed these sessions, there is a page available. All of these sessions are on YouTube. So definitely share them with your team. It'll give you something to talk about in your next meeting, or just watch them yourself if you missed any of these sessions. These are all 5-star sessions. Let's jump to the next one. The next session was practical generative AI, ethics and compliance, and risk mitigation. So everybody's talking about AI, and I've been to several webinars that seem to really only scratch the surface. What I really liked about this session, and what I really like about the series that me and you are doing together, Tom, is like we're diving a little bit deeper, and we're trying to like create some actionable insights or some talk about how we can actually not just sort of theoretically understand what AI is, but really bring that down into the business. So Reed was emphasizing that the internal political alignment is one of the hardest parts of AI risk management. From your experience with international compliance challenges, Tom, how do you approach getting this organizational buy-in, or how do you sort of attack this political alignment for something as nebulous as AI governance, where we don't have, books and books of like regulations in place yet?
So I'm going to default back to one of the people I interviewed for my book, Carl Hahn, and he would start every conversation about a new initiative, a new product offering, a new service offering with the question, what's the business value? And if you can't answer what's the business value, then that should be the end of it. So you as the compliance professional have to demonstrate to the business, if I do this, and if we make this done successfully, it will increase the business value. It will increase the speed of business operations. It will increase the efficiency of our internal controls. It will increase the profitability of the company. But what's the business value? So we in compliance, and I think we've been talking about this for many, many years, but now I think that should be the first question that we ask. And when we sit across from the CFO or we sit across from the CEO and we say, we want to bring AI for compliance, and here's the increased business value. Because if you can give the business greater value while making your compliance more effective, that is moving very close to the Holy Grail.
Yeah, and I mean, in doing that, you naturally are speaking the language of business. You're not saying, oh, we should, because we don't want to get in trouble, which every leader in an organization is constantly kind of navigating through risk and living in the gray, but rather you've pivoted that conversation to how we can improve the business, how we can improve the bottom line, how the business can generate more profitability or whatever. It's naturally going to like resonate a lot more with those folks. I just think, right now, I think we're at kind of a tough time because in many other sort of sub aspects or sub functions within a compliance or ethics department, there's a lot of like existing regulation, right? But regulation is always like a lag. It's always lagging behind something that has already gone wrong. Like think of how many regulations there are around car safety. Each one of those pieces of regulation is a function of something that went wrong in a car blew up, or, the death rate on a car was too high or something like that. We're not at that point of like maturity in this sort of sub aspect of a program with respect to AI. And so I want to kind of talk about like, why is a flexible principle-based approach to governance essential rather than like relying on lagging or non-existent regulations?
Because it boils down in my mind, Nick, to transparency and trust. The employees, the company, the management, they have to trust that this AI solution will not get them in trouble. And that means you as the compliance officer have to have visibility into what AI is doing. You can't go to ChatGPT and use OpenAI and dump in a spreadsheet and say, what's my ROI in this? Number one, you've given away company secrets. But number two, you are drawing on data that may be outside your organization that will be broader than, the remit of what your company has or does business, or a variety of other factors. If you have a ringed fence set of data, whether you have created that yourself, whether you use Notebook LM, there's some tools that allow you to do that, then you can begin to get an understanding of at least the data input that led to whatever the AI answer is. And then you can move to implement that. That's the transparency part. You may not still be able to get how the neuron's synapse is fired in which direction to get this answer, but at least this was the data it looked at, this was its instructions, and this is what we came up with. And then you can have that trust or use that to build trust with both employees and management.
I love this point that was made during Ethicsverse Day or during the session, probably because I may have made it. But we also can't see the synapses firing in somebody's brain, right? We seem to be more comfortable with humans, right? But we don't know what biases they have. People can hide those things and so forth. So what we end up really focusing on and what our handles are kind of attached to are like the outputs from that system, that human being. Well, now we have a new system, an AI system, and we can get very caught up in the black box of it all, and we can get like very risk averse to it, which can create sort of a chasm in terms of like engagement with this technology, because we have a different prioritization in our little niche of the organization relative to maybe leadership who has pressure to adopt AI or pressure from the board to drive, more profitability or more growth. I think when we can see how these two technologies, human beings and AI, are really more similar than they are different, then we can really acclimate to similar types of things to analyze where those risks might exist.
Nick, there was one other point that really struck me. I can't remember. I think it was Andrew McBride who said it, which was, you don't have to do everything at once.
Great.
Pick
That's right.
one project. You may want to do low hanging fruit, but just pick one and focus your efforts on one. Design it, test it, implement with enhanced monitoring before you roll out. Whatever the tech process for that phrase is, and I'm sure there is one that I'm using the wrong words. But his point was, you don't have to reinvent the world tomorrow. You just have to test something, prove it works, and that will buy you greater credibility. And do something that you can show a demonstrable either ROI or increase in efficiency, that will buy you greater credibility. Don't come in and say, we're going to redo our whole department based upon Tom's book in AI. Not needed and will be not helpful.
I mean, it can be very intimidating to think about getting dropped in the middle of a lake if you don't know how to swim. So don't drop yourself in the middle of a lake, but you can walk into the shallow end of a pool and start kind of splashing around and figuring out how to swim in sort of a more controlled environment. And I think the worst thing we can do when this new technology is like, it's like a tsunami hitting all of our businesses and all these different functions in our business. Like there's myriad applications of AI right now beyond, and there's new stuff coming out all the time. Like my Twitter feed is full of all these agents that people are making and all these new innovations that are happening. The worst thing we can do is sit on the deck of the pool because it's really going to pass us by. And I think, another point was made that this is not really that different than something else that has come out before, whether it's a new regulation or it's another new technology or whatever, going into a new, a new country to do business. We all naturally acclimate to the risks, and we all bring this sort of risk lens to any of these new things that come across our plate. It's a new acquisition in a business that maybe isn't core to the business that we're in. We're immediately in real time, like assessing how those risks are going to end up integrating into the business. And so I think there's a lot of power and there's a lot of freedom in relying on and trusting that we have this risk lens, this, risk-based approach that we approach everything with. And this is just another thing to sort of look at.
The other point that really struck me, and I'm sorry, I forgot the guest's name. It was the non-compliance guy.
Reed.
He said cross-functional collaboration is not critical, it's mandatory. And he gave the example of a situation where he was brought in to help a company design and implement an entire AI system, which he did. But after design, they went to the implementation team, and the implementation team completely slow-walked it.
Yep.
Because they were not a part of the collaborative effort to design and build it. And so they had no investment in it. They didn't feel like they had been consulted, and they didn't feel like they had all of the accountability with none of the control. And he said, so it was a disaster. So you have to have not simply a cross-functional team for design, but you have to have a cross-functional team for buy-in and successful implementation.
I think that's so spot on. There's this famous HBR article that I've referenced 100 times in my life called Fair Process. And in a knowledge work economy where people aren't just pulling levers and spitting out widgets from a machine, but rather the outputs are human based and an application of people's individual creativity, it requires that buy-in. And so again, just like anything else, just like any other change that we're pushing, we have to be smart about that process and see around the curve the type of friction that might come about that process. Like this implementation example is a great example of that. Having one person from implementation, maybe not even being part of the core group, but at least consulted before, can do a lot to add some oil to that machine and reduce some of that friction. But we have to keep in mind that as more technology comes in to our organizations, there's still knowledge work businesses. They still require the buy-in and the voluntary participation of the people, within it. So little moves like that, I think, can do a lot. Like sitting back for a second and kind of planning our attack in a more sort of thoughtful way can do a lot to avoid the sunk cost of spending a bunch of time where something doesn't really make it off the launch pad. One more question on the AI one before we jump to the DOJ section. That was section 3. How do you think compliance professionals adapt their competencies and governance structures to oversee AI and its unique risks, particularly in the context of shadow AI. Shadow AI being, use of AI that's not maybe approved or that's not on the radar of the business. Somebody using ChatGPT on their personal computer or on their phone because it's locked out of their work computer, something like that.
Yeah, Matt had a great statistic on this. I think he said something along the lines of, it was reported that in one study, 50% of employees admitted to using shadowed AI, and that if that was the reported number, it was probably 75 or 80%.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. I don't want to in any way, well, I won't even say it then. Employees are going to use it. It's a tool. It's a powerful tool. It's cool right now. And just for the vibe alone, you want to check it out. 7-year-old daughter's told me to talk about the vibe. And so the vibe is cool. But the reality is it's a very powerful tool. And if you do not allow employees to use that tool, they will find a way to do it. And then you will have no visibility or no control. I can remember when at Halliburton, they didn't want to give everybody a cell phone. And then one time the CEO texted one lawyer in our law department, the one who had a cell phone, in the middle of a meeting asking a question. She immediately responded with the answer. And he said, get everybody a phone. Business people need to have access to that kind of legal advice. And that was just a tool. And so it's a very powerful tool, and companies who are not using it are going to fall further and further behind the curve. And in the realm of talent acquisition and talent retention, people want to work for places where the vibe is cool. And the vibe is cool when you have the coolest toys. In my little hometown, we have a very successful privately owned regional hospital. And I have heard management say one of the reasons we are so successful in getting doctors to move to Kerrville, Texas is we made a conscious decision to have the newest, coolest toys, because that's what doctors want to practice medicine with. And so we make that investment as a talent acquisition and retention strategy, in addition to making us, we think, a more effective deliverer of medicine and hospital services. So talent acquisition and talent retention is absolutely critical. If you don't allow employees to use tools which can make them exponentially more efficient, they're going to figure out a way to do it, or they're going to go to a company that does allow them to do so.
Great point. And, I think like shadow AI is kind of like retaliation. I was talking to someone recently and they said, I don't really think that we have like the shadow AI problem. And I was like, why? They're like, well, we have a no use policy and like we've locked it down everywhere. And I'm just like, I bet you probably don't think you have a retaliation problem because you have a zero tolerance on retaliation, policy. It's happening. It's going to happen. And so, again, we got to jump in the pool and we have to manage the risks that are most likely prevalent in our organization. And to your point, if 50% of people are saying that they're using it, in an unapproved way, it's probably way higher than 50%. So we have to embrace the technology, to your point, and we have to just do something to like inch the game forward. This is a game of inches. It's a game of incrementalism or like continuous improvement. We're not going to wave a magic wand to just de-risk the organization. The only de-risked organization is one that's shuttered. Let's jump to DOJ Insights, because I really loved this session. I thought it was really insightful. And I felt like we got a lot of really actionable insights from people that used to work in DOJ, and they shared some perspectives that I felt were really enlightening. So we heard from Matt Axelrod in that session, along with Leah Simonton and Scott Hogan, about enforcement challenges under the new administration, which you kind of touched on in the introduction there, Tom. The message seemed to be that there's different priorities, perhaps, but the same fundamentals are still at play. How do you think compliance professionals should be preparing for this environment? What's the same and what's different?
So, Nick, 10 or 15 years ago, we used to say you have to read the tea leaves to figure out what the DOJ is going to do. And Mike Volkov was the most insistent in saying, no, you don't have to, because they always communicate their intentions. And this was a prime example of that maxim for me. We don't have to guess. They are very clearly communicating their intentions. You may not want FCPA enforcement to be lessened. You may disagree with the Blanche memo, Deputy Attorney General Blanche, but he has made absolutely clear the administration's priorities around FCPA, around tariffs, around economic sanctions, and compliance has to answer and be ready to answer to senior management about how are we going to manage these increased risks. They are not new risks, they are increased risks. But the DOJ has been, I'll give them credit, very clear in saying these are our priorities. Once again, you may disagree with them, but it doesn't matter because that's this DOJ's priorities.
I think that's right. And I want to kind of dive into a little bit more around the regulatory enforcement environment. So I think it's shifted a little bit under the current administration. But what do you think the enduring compliance principles are that the DOJ is consistently emphasizing? Like, what's the same?
Well, it's the same basic format and the hallmarks of an effective compliance program. But it starts with a risk assessment. Assess your risks. Don't get a canned risk assessment off the internet and do it every 3 years. No, when your risks change, reassess your risks. Now, that can be, and over the past 6 to 7 months, weekly, monthly, at some period of time that is much more compressed than it would have been previously.
Exactly.
But if secondary sanctions are about to become a thing, assess your company's risks for violation of secondary sanctions.
You just cut out there for a sec. Please keep going.
The DOJ has communicated what their enforcement priorities are. If you're doing business in Mexico, you need to assess the potential risk that some of the third parties you're dealing with may be associated with cartels. Because remember, they're now foreign terrorist organizations, and that's a level of risk to your company. Have you done sufficient due diligence on who you thought was your accountant in a small Mexican town? Turns out it was a shell corporation. That's a risk. So your risks have changed, but you have to begin with, let's look at our risks in a new area or in a new way, and then build out your risk management strategy from that information.
Yeah, and that risk management strategy, to your point, you can't eat the whole elephant in one bite. And that elephant size is kind of changing, right? Like our workload is changing. And so there's new opportunities for us to reassess those risks and how our resources are deployed in like mitigating those risks, A, and B, back to what I was saying in terms of the opportunity that this creates. There's a new opportunity for us to advocate for what we need in the context of, this new risk landscape. I mean, it's not like, most boards, most CEOs are not naturally looking at everything from a compliance lens, at least first, right? They're looking at it sort of from a macro business risk perspective. And so when we can be that voice where we have that information asymmetry or that perspective asymmetry, and we can add more to the conversation, we can very quickly elevate from that kiddie table, like we're always talking about, to that grown folks table, if in fact you don't feel like you're at that grown folks table now. Like there's so much opportunity right now, especially under this new administration, where the scope of what they're looking at is changing and what's kind of inbounds and what's out of bounds is changing. Like you mentioned, that sort of second tier tariff risk, that's a bunch of supply chain risk. That's a bunch of ultimately business risk that we can ultimately influence by advocating and getting in. We have to, I've said this 100 times, but like what got us here isn't going to get us there. For the next 10 years to look different, it's going to require us to show up as business people and really speak the language of business and advocate for ourselves. Pull on that, that high agency lever that's within all of us, quiet that voice of, that victim mentality voice, and just remember that what has been does not have to be what's going to be,
Nick, it's also simply beyond responding to modifying or evolving risks directly, legal risks under this administration. So, for instance, think of what's happened in China over the past 30 days. Two Americans have been detained at the border. Are you at risk if the trade competition / trade war increases with China? Is your company at risk of having their employees held in China? What happens if this insanity with Brazil escalates even more? Is Brazil going to retaliate against either Americans doing business in Brazil, American companies doing business in Brazil, or somebody American traveling to Brazil, so that there are ancillary risks that are not simply legal risks from the United States government, but they're risks you're going to need to be aware of. What happens if, I think it was Uber, I think, who had sent a compliance officer to Nigeria, and he was arrested and held for 9 months when he was there to talk about compliance issues, and they were there to talk about tax issues and alleged tax payments which had not been made. And what are you going to do in that situation? So one thing I've learned from the July 4th floods, you have to prepare for the worst.
Yeah, and I think we have to be looking, we have to take time to pick our eyes up from our desk and see what's going on in the world, because sometimes those can be cautionary tales that can be leveraged in our own internal communications as we advocate for ourselves, or as we attempt to show up more as a business person to get those light bulbs at the top screwed on. People are not going to naturally just say, oh my gosh, I can't. Oh, you know what? I bet compliance could really add a bunch more value here. Everybody's drinking from a fire hose. Everybody's running fast and trying to manage their own little piece of the business, trying to manage their job. We have to be extremely proactive, and there's all these cautionary tales going on. So we have to, advocate for ourselves and be tuned in to start to see how these things that are happening in the world might intersect with our business and might be creating a risk that's not on anyone's radar. It should be on our radar first. Before we move on to the Office of Unlock session, I should say, I want to talk about this calculus behind voluntary self-disclosure. This is something that has, I thought this part of the conversation was extremely interesting. It's not a binary type of a situation. So when we're thinking about, this strategic calculus behind voluntary self-disclosure, why is individual accountability a heightened focus for the Department of Justice? And what do you think the critical implications are for corporate leadership?
Nick, in 2015, Sally Yates announced the Yates memo, where she said there will be a heightened accountability for individuals. This is nothing new. And so, but it doesn't mean it's lessened in its impact, that the department is going to go after individuals. And when you pair it or marry it, however, with the increased incentive for self-disclosures, you see companies who recognize we can get a pass, but he or she is going to be prosecuted. Well, guess what they're going to choose? We're going to choose to protect ourselves, as they should, because corporations are, of course, legal persons in America. So the accountability of individuals will be based on companies self-disclosing. 2 weeks ago, we had a case settle in Austin of alleged it was anti-competitive behavior, and the company settled and hung out the CEO, who is fighting individual charges. So I think we're going to see that more and more. And if you're an officer or you're a director, I hope you have some pretty good D&O insurance. I would check on that before you take a position.
How can this thing that you say is nothing new, which I agree is nothing new, how can a compliance department or an organization use that to really build this culture of integrity to not only, activate sort of, better participation within the organization, but also maybe stack the deck in their favor should the DOJ come knocking, in the context of whether they have an effective program? How can this be used as a strategic lever? Sure.
It's all turns on self-disclosure. If you self-disclose first, before the DOJ gets the information, or perhaps the SEC, this administration will look very favorably on giving you a full declination, absent aggravating circumstances. So if that means crowdsourcing risk intelligence information at scale from your own organization, and I think you call that a speak-up culture. So if people speak up, as people raise their hand and say, I saw something, I heard something, I felt something, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, take it seriously, look into it. And if it warrants a self-disclosure, if it's a violation and it warrants a self-disclosure, make that self-disclosure. Now, you're going to have to give any ill-gotten gain back. I understand that. But if you've already had that type of culture which inputted the information, i.e. someone felt safe enough to speak up and you have taken it in, i.e. listened and acted or actioned upon it, that is going to be a pretty good evidence that you have an effective compliance program. You may need to tweak, you may need to do a root cause analysis to see what happened, but the overall costs are going to be much less. But it all starts with that self-disclosure, and that starts with a speak up.
Yeah, and I think recognizing that if a company has a speak up culture, it's really driven by a bunch of individuals who feel like they're part of a speak up culture. That can kind of flip the perspective on its head a little bit, and we can solve for that as opposed to, this amorphous thing that might be, again, back to that elephant analogy, that it's like, how do I even kind of attack this thing? The more of that messaging that we can push through our communication to stakeholders up and down that sort of stakeholder stack that kind of resonate with the guidance that DOJ continues to put out, that they, from my view, continue to try to be as transparent as possible about, recognizing that every business is different. They're trying to kind of drive principle-based guidance forward. The more of that we can tie our efforts to, I think the stronger position we are, or the stronger position we put ourselves in to rest assured that our program is more effective than perhaps it was. All right, so we got a couple of minutes left here. I can't believe this is almost overtime. We should have maybe made this a 90-minute session, man. You coming on, you have a standing invitation anytime to come on the Ethicsverse. They don't call you the voice of compliance for nothing. I want to talk about this last session that was really like a massive shot in the arm. This was really a mindset session with the one and only Dr. Hema Lomax, who I've learned so much from, who coined the term crowdsourcing risk intelligence at scale. And if you guys missed this session, because this was a hidden bonus session called Becoming the Office of Unlock, I'd really encourage you to find it on YouTube and watch the replay. But she made this compelling case for rebranding compliance as the Office of Unlock. You've done a ton of work in this space. You've interviewed thousands and thousands of compliance officers. What does this transformation actually look like in practice from your standpoint?
First of all, if you ever have the opportunity to hear Hema Lomax run, do not walk to the presentation, because you will learn something. I learned something from her every time I listen to her. Her and the spin she put on something that I thought was straightforward was absolutely brilliant. You and I will talk about showing the value of compliance and moving from Dr. No from the land of no. Well, Hema says that's not the right way to look at it. Compliance has to make the change, not the employee. Compliance has to we have to change from wagging our finger and saying, don't do this or don't do that, and looking at employees as the source of our violations. And we need to shift the narrative, because when you say that to someone, they're not going to receive that message well. But if we can reshape the narrative to, how can I help you unlock crowdsourced intelligence that's sitting there with the employee base and drive business value and increase profitability, you have completely shifted the narrative. So I really appreciated the pitch she put on it, or the different way she said to look at it, that it's on us. And if it's on us, that means we control it, and gives us the opportunity to do exactly what she says, which is change the narrative.
And she talked, once she said it, I was like, oh, that's so, so well put. She talked about the importance of aligning our efforts with business objectives. And that seems so obvious at some level, and yet I just know so many times we just aren't able to do that. Why do you think that's hard for folks? And where do you think they should get started in trying to connect their efforts to the business objectives and putting, and kind of being that servant to the organization? It's kind of a perspective flip.
Yeah, I think it's still a legacy of compliance. Chief compliance officers were like me. They were legally trained. They were lawyers. They were from the general counsel's office. We moved into compliance, for whatever reason we could or we had to. And that we had that legal mentality of no. And lawyers are there to protect the company when they're in the general counsel's office. It's a very different dynamic when you move to compliance, but that legacy mindset was there. And so, but early on in the first decade of this century, people really did say no, and say, no, you can't do that. And that reputation took hold with the employee base. And we didn't do anything to try and change that, or we didn't do enough. And so that's why I really appreciated him saying, quit worrying about what the employees think. You work on yourself. You change your mindset to one of unlocking or unleashing the power from the compliance perspective, and that will change the dynamic.
Yeah, she made this quote. She said, form first and substance will follow. We have to create a new image for ourselves individually, for the departments we're a part of, or the departments we're leading, if we're ever going to see any meaningful change. And that's a very freeing That's a very freeing concept. Like, it starts in our minds. And when we can change that mindset, we start to see different opportunities to add value to the business. And now we can very quickly, sometimes we think changing a brand is like, turning a battleship, and it's really not. It's really like flipping a light switch, because a bunch of these light switches in the minds of the people that we're trying to influence can be flipped very quickly. All right, so we are right at time. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for Tom. Tom, this was freaking awesome as usual. Next week, we got a couple of great sessions for you. So if you're in healthcare, you're not going to want to miss Tuesday's session, where we are going to be talking about AI risk to AI ready, tools, tactics, and transformation with the one and only Nakas. If you don't know Nakas, follow him on LinkedIn. He is brilliant, and he has a lot of great insights on how to apply. He's building a really cool program right now, and he's right at the cutting edge of AI. So we're going to be talking about AI risk to AI ready. That's next Tuesday. And then next Thursday, we're going to be talking about emotionally intelligent ethics and compliance, the missing link in organizational change. So we're going to continue to keep pushing out this thought leadership. We're going to continue to keep getting great guests on like Tom, and hope that you found some value in it. Invite your friends, invite your neighbors, invite your ex-wives and ex-husbands, invite your enemies, invite anybody you think who wants to change the world by making our workplace a little bit better. And we'll see you next week. See ya.